Hey guys, Literary Prepper here with you again. I just want to talk to you guys today about plants and gardening because, depending on what kind of situation you're preparing for, it depends on, how intense and how much space you guys have, how intense you guys want to get into gardening. But even from a money saving and environmental perspective, growing your own plants and fruits and veggies is really satisfying, and it saves you a lot of money at the supermarket or a greengrocer or wherever you buy fruit and veggies. So put this little guy down for now. Let's get right down to basics when we're looking at preps. So do we want these guys or do we want these guys? So both of these are beans. Both of them, as far as I'm aware, have the same sort of nutritional value, pros and cons. This one obviously is sort of ready to open and it's good to go sort of thing. You just add it to your food, or if you're in a sort of bit of a tight situation, you can eat it straight out of the can. If you're short on water, then you can use the bean juice to cook with rather than, calling on your water stores for cooking when you're adding things like canned beans. These are just some of the preferred brands. There's no real reason why I chose these brands other than these are the ones I like. These guys here though, you dried beans. So these will sort of draw on your water supplies when you're looking at cooking them, because you need to pre-soak them for a decent amount of time. So this one says overnight bean soak, or you can cook it for an hour. But these guys here, if you decide that you want to grow your own, or you're in a situation where you need to start growing your own food, you can use these guys the same way that you would seeds from a hardware store. You just use them exactly the same. So if you're bugging in and you don't have access to a front or a backyard, but you still want to try to grow your own food inside, or if you're like me and try to sort of hedge your bets a little bit and germinate things before putting them outside rather than just sticking them in the dirt and waiting for them, you should have cotton balls in your stores anyway, for all sorts of medical and hygiene purposes. So I get these little guys in like a plastic container, one of those sort of disposable takeaway containers, and you just unravel him a little bit. You get sort of half a dozen of these, just lie them on the bottom. Make sure that your little seed stays moist. I like to sort of cover it with maybe a little bit of paper towel or tissue or something like that to make sure the whole seed stays moist, because for seeds to germinate they need moisture and they need to be warm. Not too warm, but they need to be warm. This little guy here is a broad bean. I put him in a little container with some water about 4 days ago, and he's already starting to germinate. Now, plant germination. So when you're looking at your stores, have a mix of dried beans and canned beans, because whilst cans are really convenient, as I said, like you can germinate from and that's not just dried beans, it's also dried chickpeas, dried lentils, all sorts of sort of seed-based products from there. If I really wanted to, I could eat this little guy right now, because it's effectively a sprout. So that's the other way that you can sort of go about it, is to deliberately germinate them to tap into the extra nutrients within that little seed. If that's the way you want to go, if you want some extra nutrients, that also gives you like a green vegetable effectively. So stepping back a bit, how do we go about getting seeds? Now, I wanted to actually show you guys on a real flower, but we've had some absolutely horrendous weather lately, and all of my flowers have, you know, either not done their thing or they've just died before, you know, I've decided to do this video. So unfortunately the flowers that I wanted to use for this video aren't available at the moment. So you're going to have to put up with my horrendous little drawing here. So if we say this is a flower, so we have the stem with little bottom leaves, we have the petals here. So everyone's familiar with the parts of the flower that have the pollen. If you've ever brushed past wearing, you know, nice clothing and had yellow pollen stains all over it, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So the long protruding thing from the center of the flower is called a style. On top of that is a little sort of sticky patch called a stigma. So when a bee or other kind of insect or animal gets into a flower, they take the pollen from the anthers, the little pollen creating guys down here, and they either transfer that into this, like if it's self-pollinating, into the same flower from here, or they'll take it from one flower and go to another flower, but it's a similar process either way. So they take the pollen from the anther and it will get stuck to the stigma. And in a very similar way to the human reproductive system, it will travel down the style as it would a fallopian tube if we're talking about sperm. It comes to the ovary. So from there, it basically makes seeds, and that's when your flower will start to sort of die off, and you'll notice that it will start to swell as the seed pod starts to grow and develop. And then from there, it will obviously sort of burst open and disperse the seeds, or it will turn into a fruit so that another animal can come along and, you know, sort of disperse the seeds for them. So, if you're trying to grow more flowers, then that means that what they call deadheading is really important. So you go along the plant, and when the flowers start to get old, you preemptively cut them off. And this will force the plant to sort of go into a shock almost, and it will produce more. So when people say things like, oh, you shouldn't cut flowers, it's actually better for the plant if you want a more productive flowering season. Better for the plants if you want flowers to go ahead and you know, preemptively cut off the dying and older flowers to promote new growth, and not allow the plant to get to that seeding fruiting stage. Now, if you're wanting to grow fruit and vegetables, obviously you want them to get to that stage. But perhaps if you can sort of go along the plant, and if you notice that there are smaller or struggling flowers, then you might want to get rid of those. It's the same when you're looking at leaf growth. If you want to promote leaf growth, go along every now and then and just cut off a few leaves here and there. The plant will believe that it's under attack, and it will send a message to start growing more to replace whatever's been damaged or cut off. So that's really, really important when you're looking at what you want to get out of your plants. So if you want flowers, deadhead. If you want fruit, just cut off a few bits and pieces here and there, or just attack the leaves. We'll do the same sort of thing. You also want to pay attention to what's happening with your soil, because if you have too much nitrogen in your soil, you'll get a really, really leafy plant, but you won't get any, or you'll get less fruit and flowers, because nitrogen is really good for green growth. Really good if you're looking at things like salad veggies, or if you're looking at things like spinach or you know, anything like that, but not good if you want anything that comes from flowers. So for that, you want a little bit more potassium. But yeah, you want to keep an eye on your soil anyway, and remember, it doesn't matter what is wrong with your soil, adding organic matter will always help. So if you have sandy soil, add organic matter. If you have clay soil, add organic matter. If you have poor draining soil, add organic matter. If anything to do with your plants is off, add organic matter. And not the synthetic stuff, because that can actually destroy the microbes in your soil. You want to add compost and manures and things like that. You don't want to add synthetic stuff, because over time you'll actually make the problem worse for yourself. So while we're on the subject of plants, now in Australia we have quite tight regulations around what we can do as far as self-defense goes. Getting things like gun licenses is not impossible. You basically just find yourself a gun club, and they will be able to help you with firearms safety courses, and you just go down to your local police station and fill out a form, and they will take a fee from you and process your forms. I'm not sure what the time frame is. It costs a few $100s to get it all set up once you're done with all your licensing fees and your gun safety courses and all the rest of it. But if that's something that you're interested in, it's really not difficult. It's just expensive and time consuming. So it is a myth that we don't have guns in Australia. We also have gun violence in schools that no one wants to talk about. So that's for another episode. But while we're talking about home defense, most councils, at least in metropolitan areas around Australia, will only let you build a fence to about 6 foot tall. After that, you have to actually submit a request for an extension, and you can just tell them that you have a large dog or a dangerous dog or something, and you can go that way. But everything to do with council costs money. So if you want to get around that, there are a few things that you can do. Now, what I'm about to talk about, it does sort of get a little bit controversial. There are two mindsets when it comes to what to do with your property boundaries. One line of thought is clear everything, because that means that nobody has a hiding place and you can see absolutely everything going on and no one will sneak up on you. The other line of thinking is you want some kind of boundary to keep people out. So if you're of the latter mindset, things like razor wire in Australia are also very hard to come by. Not impossible, but again, very difficult, because you need to first track down a company that will supply you with enough. You need to pay for it, and it is quite expensive. You need to store it properly. You need to know how to set it up, and just it gets bigger than Ben-Hur very, very quickly. So the other thing you can do is barbed wire, but barbed wire really, for anyone who's ever been around a farm or a property, you know very well that unless you've got layers and layers of the stuff, it's you can jump over it with relative ease. If you're talking about people who are desperate and hungry and thirsty, a couple of lines of barbed wire is not going to slow them down by a whole lot. If you were to run that along the top of a tall wall or a fence line, it might give you a small advantage, but it won't do any more than broken glass will do. So it also kind of, it highlights that you basically have, whatever it is sort of built up, and, again, it does sort of tell people that you have something that is worth stealing. So it comes into the sort of thing of being a little bit sneaky with how you go about things. So my little friend over here that I had before is from a bougainvillea plant. And this is one of my favorite anti-personnel plants. So these guys, I I believe, a native to South Africa. So this is actually a leaf. And these guys come out, little flowers usually come out inside there. They're usually like a creamy yellow color. But that's actually the end tips of the leaves. So you'll get a little guy like this growing, and then you wind up with a pretty little tip on the end of it. These came from 2 different plants. So you've got also a multitude of colors. This one's an apricot one, but it's not out in flower yet. This one's a dark pink one, which is really pretty en masse. But what I love about bougainvillea is that behind every leaf, they have massive thorns, which when they harden up, these are a little bit green here, but when they harden up, they're quite nasty. So the smaller ones up here are a little bit sharper, but they're quite nasty. This, if you have the time, just a second, sorry about that. If you have the time, it's actually a really, really good hedging plant. And mine are quite small at the moment, but in the future, they will look rather nice. They're a very pretty hedge that come out in all sorts of pinks and purples, apricots. You can get white ones, pretty much every color that you can imagine. Roses coming in, you can get in bougainvilleas, and really thick, gnarly, woody bases. So for someone to want to climb over or through a hedge of bougainvillea, they won't get very far because it's quite a thick plant once it's established, and quite big, nasty, scratchy thorns. So whilst you can't have them around your entire perimeter, because that would mean that you would have no exit, it is certainly something to have in vulnerable locations. So if you have a front yard, for example, then you can use that to channel potential intruders to one vantage point, rather than having 4 or more sides of your yard open. If you have a perimeter fence of some description or a wall, as well as a really well-established bougainvillea hedge, then that's some fairly efficient border security on a domestic level. So you can have that running down your sides or maybe across the front of your property, so that people really only have one way in and out. If they wanted to cut it down to access your property, we're talking chainsaws, or they'd be there long enough with a handsaw or secateurs that you could do something about them. But no one is getting into your property without at least a chainsaw. And I've seen well-established ones with trunks like trees, so you're not going to run over it with a vehicle very easily either. Other kinds of anti-personnel plants that you may want to sort of consider, depending on time again. Cacti are very, very slow growing and not suited to wet climates. So unless you're willing to invest a lot of money in well-established ones that do get quite expensive because they're so slow growing, that's another way that you can go about it. Obviously they know that they're spiky, they're going to stay away from them. But another one that's really simple and probably faster growing than the bougainvillea, and again very easy to sort of develop into quite a large plant, and you can have again a wall, roses. So think about things like roses that people sort of to look at, they wouldn't think anything of it, but you wouldn't want to go grabbing one. And again, if they were going to try to if you had a thick wall of them, they're going to try to remove them, then it would take them a very long time, because they are quite nasty, especially at the base when the thorns begin to sort of get quite hard and woody. So roses also double as an edible plant. So you can eat the flowers. We have quite a bad problem with hares where we are. So I usually try to sort of keep a decent sort of veggie garden going. When we moved into the house that we're in at the moment, that wasn't an option because anything that went out the front had to be rabbit and hare proof. So I jumped online, did a bit of a Google search, and at the moment we have petunias. Can't remember if they're edible or not, but they're something that keep the hares away. We have zinnias, which the leaves on them are quite coarse, and they're flower, but they're not the prettiest plant, but they are edible. Another plant that we have out there is marigolds. So you start to get into like companion planting sort of thing. So because we have the petunias, the zinnias, what else do we have? And the marigolds, we can sort of plant those around more vulnerable plants. So at the moment I also have some chilies growing out there, and the chilies are surrounded by marigolds to try to keep the bugs and the hares away. It's been working quite well for about a month or two, so far so good. We've also got some tomatoes that are looking very promising, and nothing has seemed to have a go at those. So within your stores, you want to have some kind of companion plant. Things like marigolds are a brilliant go-to, and they're very easy to germinate, and you know, as soon as they go to seed, you just sort of, they have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of seeds within each flower. They're brilliant as far as seed storage goes. So you can have an endless supply of marigolds. And again, people don't look at a house that has marigolds and go prepper. They go, oh, pretty flowers. So at the moment, I think ours is like one of 2 houses on the street that actually have flowers out the front. So the only thing that people know about our house is that, you know, it's pretty. What else do we have out there? Nasturtiums is something that I'm also trying to germinate at the moment. Nasturtiums, again, an edible plant. They're a little bit more hardy, very fast growing, and if you try to rip them out, they stink to high heaven. They will make you feel sick, the smell that they give off, but you can eat them. So when you're just picking them by, you know, the individual flowers or individual leaves to use as like a salad addition, then they're fine. They're actually, you know, they have quite a peppery flavor if you've never sort of gone down that road. But just get a little bit creative with what you have in your garden or even on your verge. So the tomatoes and the chilies that I mentioned, we've actually got those growing on the verge. So as far as what happens when they start to fruit, they're on public property. So, you know, if someone else decides that they want to help themselves, then so be it. I'm also hoping that in a shit hits the fan situation, if they think that they're getting everything that we have because it's out the front, then hopefully they'll be less likely to sort of come knocking, because, you know, effectively they will see that they have taken everything that we have. So a little bit of deception there, hopefully, you know, utilizing every inch of space that we can. If you aren't sure about what to do with your verge, that's just a little strip of grass between the footpath and the main road out the front of your house. If you go to your local council website and check their bylaws, they'll tell you, or if you call them, they'll tell you exactly what you can and can't do. Where we are, as long as we don't put anything there that's going to potentially hurt somebody or anything that's, you know, ridiculously poisonous, then, you know, we're allowed to put whatever plants that we want out onto the verge. So it's worth checking out if you want some extra garden space, like particularly if you don't have a very big backyard or front yard and you're sort of thinking, well, you know, I don't have space but I would like to grow something. So things like little bougainvillea, council would say no, but growing it on our property, Meg says yes. So yeah, this is just my thoughts for today. So you want to store 2 different types of beans. That's your dried beans and your canned beans. Remember our little flower sex ed, and you know, if you want to grow flowers, deadhead, and if you know, aren't sure about your soil composition, then you can nick down to pretty much any hardware store and they will have kits there that you can actually do your own soil test and find out how you need to alter that. But remember, everything that is wrong with dirt can be fixed with organic matter. And do some experimenting with, you know, maybe some of your stores, or if you buy some extra bags and things, then have a go at germinating your own plants. If you've never done this before, or if it's been a very, very long time since you've done any sort of gardening, remember, cotton wool balls, a couple of seeds, some water, a little plastic container. You may as well start practicing these skills now rather than, you know, when something goes wrong and you're like, oh, hang on a second, I'm not quite sure what to do. Practice now. And have a look around your garden, or you know, the front of your house or whatever, and do some research on different plants and things and see what you guys can use at home for anti-personnel plants, because it's a much friendlier looking way of basically forcing people to bugger off. So that's my thoughts for today on different plants. If you guys have any questions, comments, anything like that, feel free to pop them down in the comments below. Like, share, subscribe, all that jazz. I'm in the process of setting up a Patreon account, so that's not quite ready to go, but yeah, if you guys thought that this was worthwhile, then feel free to share. But for now, that's me, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.